All right, welcome to Data Hurls. My name is Michael Burke.
And I'm Chris Detzel.
And today we're going to talk about data.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about that, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Welcome to another Data Hurdles. I'm Chris Detzel and
I'm Michael Burke. How you doing, Chris?
Doing really well. I'm really excited about this. Oh, which Chris are we talking about?
Oh, that was a game changer. Yeah. So normally I ask Chris Detzel, but today we've got a special guest, Chris Pardo. Chris, how are you doing?
Doing really well. Doing really well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Today we are going to talk about the day in the life of becoming a chief data officer. But before we do that, this is the last week of June, second to last week of June, and it is a long weekend. Do you guys have any fun plans before we dive into the hot topic?
For me, I'll be doing some typical running, and I'm gotta get ready for some procedure that I'm not going to talk about today. But I'm going to have my kids for Father's Day, and we'll do some Father's Day-like stuff. So that's going to be really cool. How about you, Pardo? We're excited to have you on, by the way.
No, I'm excited to reconnect with old friends, so I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, I haven't even thought that far. Just trying to get through the week. I'll probably just hang out, maybe binge watch a few episodes of Ted Lasso. Finally got the Apple TV subscription. Yeah, it's great so far. Yeah.
And I'm behind on my mileage, Chris. As you guys know, we've got Chris and I have been training for a half marathon coming up in October, and so I have to run. Chris is holding me accountable, Chris Detzel, to 15 to 20 miles a week, and I didn't run yesterday, so I'm behind. So I have to go for like a 7-mile run this weekend, which I'm not looking forward to, but it is supposed to be hot. So, anyways, let's jump into it. Chris, thank you again for joining. We really appreciate it. The main topic that we're focusing on here is navigating the journey of becoming a chief data officer. So to kick things off, can you share a little bit about your journey and background that led you to your first CDO role?
Yeah, absolutely. And then it's interesting because when we joined Reltio, we wrote a journey line, kind of the origin story. So it was a really good exercise to kind of understand how you got there. And for me, understanding where what took place for me to become CDO, it wasn't really a line. It was almost like the opposite of a straight line. So I would summarize my journey in I guess 3 ways. So first 10 years, really technical, worked at IBM, wrote device drivers, programmed down to the metal, eventually worked in their middleware, and then eventually I left IBM, went to a company called Pervasive Software. And that company was almost like Workato before Workato, basically source target and then transformation in between. But that's kind of where I learned about business systems, right? Learned about CRMs, ERPs, and things like that. And then, while the main thing was integrating the systems, right? The one thing that was common was you're always just making sure that you're passing data around, right? Records around. So even if you have garbage in, then you have garbage in your target system, right? So that was a great experience. Learned about systems as well as integration. Went to a company called National Instruments after that. And then I was actually a PL SQL programmer. So one day I was running a query on customer list, and I found out about D&B. I always found the DUNS number in some of the attributes that returned back from my queries, and I was like, "What's the DUNS number?" And then after that, it kind of led down a rabbit hole of why it's really important to have reference data, like really good reference data. And we had gotten D&B data from a flat file, which was good. We got data in bulk, but it wasn't real time. And then eventually found an opportunity at D&B. And then that opportunity was being API product manager for Hoover's API. They eventually wanted me to work on D&B Direct, which was the enterprise API. But from there, it was great. It was a great way to see why it's important to get data real time or on demand. And then the different types of things you could do, right? You get a record, you could do a lookup on the record, and that you have the right data at the right time. And then you could do things like analytics on top of that as well. But Time at D&B was great. Worked on the API, worked on partnerships because APIs give you the ability to actually create different forms of distribution. So worked on partnerships with Salesforce, Oracle, Microsoft. Eventually led innovation at D&B for the sales and marketing business unit, and then thought about a lot of innovation strategies. So was there for about 10 years. Met Manish during that time. Manish was starting off Reltio, I think in 2013, 2012. And then he was one of our partners. So it was really good to see his view on cloud master data management.
That's really cool.
Left. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Pretty cool. It was, he had, I think, maybe 5 or 10 employees. And, you heard him talk about his vision. And, he sold me on day one, and that was back in 2013. Yeah.
D&B is such a funny
uh,
company to me too. Like, they're like 1,000 years old. Didn't they start off doing like paper master data? Wasn't that like their initial thing? Like they'd go door to door to collect information about people and keep logs like 300 years ago, right? Or something ridiculous.
yeah, that's
300
absolutely
years
right.
ago.
It's absolutely right. Yeah, they go to
No,
yeah.
no,
So it's
no
funny
joke.
because we
This is
talk
like a
about
real thing. Yeah. Detzel,
it's
this
a
is a
real
real
thing.
thing.
Yeah, 180 year.
Oh,
So
300
we
years
actually have
ago? Come on.
180 years. So
Okay.
so we had 4 presidents
That's
that
crazy.
were D&B employees, right? So Abraham Lincoln and 3 other presidents. I can't remember. I should remember it. But what they
Abraham
did was,
Lincoln.
yeah, Abe Lincoln, man. Yeah,
Oh my
yeah,
God.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Keep going. Sorry. I'm just shocked.
Yeah. So what's interesting is you could see kind of the evolution of the business, right? In a lot of different ways, right? Obviously, it's 180 years old. But it started off as, if I'm going to buy from a company or sell to a company, what is their credit,
Hmm.
right? Are they going to be around? Do they have people working there? So people would actually go door to door knocking and then see whether or not, it's a viable business, right? And then they would, take down their notes in paper, and then that's effectively what, the credit, right? The business credit. And eventually, fast forward, that's still their core competency. If I buy from a business or sell to a business, are they going to be able to, pay me, right? Um, yeah. So what's interesting is that when you sign up for D&B, you want your business credit rated just like your own personal credit.
Yeah.
And then in doing so, you could say, yes, I want to be marketed to. And then that's how they built their database of 500 million companies over time, right? And then because you have a data asset that's that big, the idea is you can move to adjacent areas. So that's very fascinating. So I see a lot of companies that have a very unique way of sourcing data. They source it and they collect it, and they can move to these adjacent markets. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't mean to
Oh,
sidetrack
that's
us too
really
much,
cool.
but
But but
I
but
think it's. Go ahead, Chris.
I was
No,
gonna.
which Chris? Sorry.
De- you should say Detzel or Pardo.
Yeah,
Um,
just
Go
say
ahead, Detzel. Yeah, this
there's
is
only
this
one
is
that's
Chris.
great,
how
by the way.
that's how I would do it. This is how I would do it. I have a I just have a thought or just a statement because this is really cool. So I get to go to a lot of or some of the Gartner events and Forrester events. Every single time I see DMB or when I talk to DMB on some of my, I call them community shows or webinars, they say, "Hey, how's Pardo doing?" And I'm like, "I don't know. He doesn't work here anymore." But I'm sure he's really good. He's doing really well. He's a CDO now and everything else. So
Yeah,
I just
sorry to make
think
those conversations awkward. Sorry about
no,
that.
I think that's awesome because what you've done there is people highly respect you because people are like,
Yep.
Pardo was awesome. You know what I mean? Like, you probably haven't. I'm sure you've heard that about yourself before, but I've heard it when I'm just hanging out with DMB people. So, anyways, go ahead, Michael. Thought you should know that.
No,
No,
I
yeah,
appreciate that. I
I was
appreciate
just gonna
that.
say the same thing. Like DMB is such a cool company. I think in every data professional's career, at some point, you start to realize that you're peaking maturity when you know about DMB, all these other big providers,
Mhm.
how they work, how to mix data in, and the stories of how they came to be. It's just incredible. Like 180 years is just that kind of history. It doesn't happen, to every company. It doesn't happen to a small fraction of companies. And just how they've maintained control on this niche market is just incredible, and they're so valuable today. Like every large business uses them. For those that don't work in the data space, they are probably one of the biggest data providers in the world. Um, and an incredible company.
Yeah, and it's the most fundamental thing, right? If you're transacting with a company, tell me information about that company.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And Chris, Detzel, I really appreciate that. I mean, it was a great experience there, and when I was there, I just worked hard and try to be a nice person. So I think that's kind of the impression I left there. So
I think so. It was a very good impression. But if
yeah.
we digress a little bit, go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, let's move on. So, Chris, after DMB, what was next in your career? I'd love to hear the journey line to where we get to CDO. That's great.
yeah, so that's kind of where the line is becoming more squiggly. Yeah, I went to Microsoft. Always wanted to work at Microsoft, and then when I went there, my parents are very happy because they know about Microsoft.
All right.
So what I did was it was a combination of finance and operations. So the idea was, how do we make all of Office, so that's Office, SharePoint, Teams, how do we make those programs more efficient, right? So basically driving down cost. And then you would do things like you work with engineering teams to, see whether or not their programs are inefficient. So maybe a program's constantly pulling for a resource when it really should be more event driven, right? Or you might be using a component on Azure that might be using SSD as opposed to a different type of storage, right? So
Yep.
there's different ways of optimizing things, and then it seems like really small things, but at the scale of Microsoft, that could be very big, right? So that was great. It was great to really work with engineering teams, understand SharePoint, Teams, and also Outlook. Um, yeah, that was a really good experience. And then went to Azure briefly, working on Purview. Well, I was going to work on Purview, but then Manish gave me a call and he said, "Hey, would love you to join. It'd be great if you focused on ecosystem strategy." I think with my background with D&B, working with all these different companies, right? Every time you transact with a company, it's good to actually do a lookup through D&B. And then when you're doing integration, having that DUNS number as the identifier is really good, right? It helps with the matching.
Yep.
And then even before that, my integration experience at Pervasive Software was good. So he wanted me to work on ecosystem strategy. So, what are some of the companies we could work with? MDM or Reltio's best of breed MDM, right? But then you need stuff that happens before it gets to MDM or happens after, right? So how do we think about some of those partnerships, and how do you think about making those partnerships more strategic? Yeah, so that was a really good experience. Learned a lot from Anish. Yeah, and then create a partnership with D&B. I'm not sure if all the details have been released yet, but I'm really hopeful that that partnership will be pretty large for Reltio. Around the same time, I had been talking to this company, Apex Analytics, since 2018. So kept in touch with
Wow.
them. Yeah, yeah. So it's always so. I guess the other takeaway is always have a conversation, right? So I met the exec team at Apex 2018. They were starting their API. They saw that I was API product manager at D&B. We exchanged some ideas, and then that led to, well, how do you think about partnerships? And it was always kind of a informal relationship. And then around the same time, their former CIO retired, and then eventually they wanted me to take over some of his duties, right? So he was a CIO, and then part of the CIO job is data governance. So my role, which is chief data officer, is data governance in addition to data monetization. So it's kind of a dual role where you need to work with all these data providers in addition to the data assets that we source, and then unlock the business value, right? Make sense of all the data, unlock the business value, and then open it up to the rest of the world, right? Not normal for a CDO, but I think it will be trending that way, right? Once you have a
Yep.
data asset, how do you monetize it? So that's kind of what you're seeing with all these marketplaces like Snowflake and Databricks. They're all having these data offerings, right? Because if you're spending all this time and energy creating this data set, you might as well have everybody reap the benefits too.
Yeah.
So
I think it's so interesting that company in the same way that DMB evolved, even though it's, not as old, right? It also evolved from paper records. Is that right?
that's right. That's right. Yeah, so the history as far as I know it, just walking the halls of Apex, started off as people looking at paper invoices, right? So let's say that we start a company tomorrow. Michael, Chris, and Chris. I'll be the second Chris.
Thank you.
Let's say that. Let's say that we want to run the business, right? So to do that, we got to buy stuff, right? So we might double pay the companies that we buy from, right? So the company started off looking at paper invoices to find those double payments, right? And then that's when they would actually charge, right? It may not be a big deal if it's a company that we start, right? Maybe eventually it'll be a big company. But if you're a Walmart or Disney and you find a double payment, and then that could be millions of dollars, right? So it kind of makes sense to work with us because the ROI is almost infinite, right? Once you find that double payment, then that's kind of when Apex gets paid, right? Um, and then the other part of that, and they created software to basically digitize that process. They created software to look for signals before a double payment is made, right? So it kind of makes sense, right? If you're one of these big companies who have all these systems, who have all these moving parts, it makes sense to work with us, right? Um, and then the other part is our executive team was out at Disney. Disney was the audit client, and then they wanted to solve for supplier onboarding, right? So if I buy from a company, are they who they say they are? Are they on an OFAC watch list? Can I trust them? Ultimately, can I trust them? And then once I onboard them, once I get them in my system, and once I start buying from them, can I continue to trust them? Right? How's their credit? Right? Are they still who they say they are? And things like that. So we have kind of this interesting product continuum where it's work with us for free, we'll find you a double payment or prevent it. That's kind of when we get paid. And then if you find a double payment, we're effectively returning millions of dollars to you. Why don't you use some of that money to actually buy or supply our software, right? So we can help you manage your ongoing risk. um, so yeah, that's kind of the business. So it's very interesting. Again, like there's a lot of data sourcing. So my job is to make sense of all that data. And then the other part is, once we source all this data and create a really good data asset, how do we actually expose it to the rest of the world? So, yeah.
So it's so interesting to me that you have this company that has kind of evolved and transformed their business strategy, similar to D&B is, and I don't know if this is a trend, Chris, of working for older companies that are kind of in this process of
Yeah.
transforming, right?
Reltio was too new. Reltio was too new.
Yeah, yeah. But it is incredible to me, as a CDO stepping into that. I'm sure you've got a lot of people who are kind of stuck in the traditional way of doing things, and maybe another group that's seeing the light of this future. How do you drive and manage expectations in an environment like that? And really, like, stepping into that, what was your experience like on day one as a new CDO, right?
Yeah, it's a very hard question to answer. What I would say is constantly evangelize, right? This is the vision. We have this asset that we have built over time, and it could be the future of the business, right? But yeah, to your point, it's a older company, and then the things that made sense to do back then, there's room for improvement, right? And again, like it's one of those things where you want to deliver slices of value, right, as opposed to having these big projects, right? Um, yeah, so I think it's evangelizing, getting mind share, and eventually getting alignment once you have the mind share, and then delivering the slices of data, slices of value, right? Not having these big replatforming projects. Just start with one domain, one problem, and then go after it. That's what I would say. Yeah. And then you have all the tactical things like, okay, there's on-premise stuff, there's cloud stuff. How do those things talk to each other? But I think in principle, really evangelizing the vision, getting or delivering slices of value early and often, and then everything else will follow.
Really interesting. So I know that a lot of the people on this call are probably younger, earlier in their career. Hopefully, we have some of the CDOs that we've reached out to listening as well. But for those that are looking to step into a CDO role, what advice can you give them? And also maybe if you can share some of the stories of, your first 90 days, if there was anything interesting stepping into this role that you had to learn quickly.
Yeah, I mean, CDO is a very interesting role, right? It's a combination of several disciplines, right? It's understanding of data, right? Understanding of systems, right? Understanding of the older technology and how that works with newer technology. But I think the overall thing, it's a people. It's a people. Like understanding people is the most important thing, right?
Yeah.
The people that you're working with, right? In terms of technology, the domain owners and what's valuable to them. Making sure everybody gets in a room and gets aligned, right? So it's cross discipline, as with everything, right? Um, I think that's kind of the main things when I think about being CDO. And then for me, the first 90 days, really understanding the people that I'll be working with, understanding the products, understanding how data flows from source to target, and then the normal things, right? Data quality, and then even before you get to data quality, provenance or lineage or observability are very important. But yeah, I think in principle, like really just understanding the lay of the land, understanding the people, understanding the value or what's valuable to the business owners. Yeah, I think those are very important. And again, like CDO, yeah, I think the CDO position will evolve to okay, now that I have this curated data asset, how do I monetize it? And then that's like a whole other component where it's more of a GTM thing, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, yeah.
And your previous experience, working at Microsoft, Dun Bradstreet, Reltio, how did these roles prepare you to take on this leadership role? Because you have a lot more direct reports now too than you've had previously as well, and I'm assuming a lot more responsibility, right, in driving this change across the business.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out if I could somehow get more hours in a day. Let me know if you have any solutions to that. Um, and I had several direct reports at DNB, so it's very similar.
Yeah.
Um, I was very lucky that when CIO retired, he had a really great team, almost self functioning, right? So I could focus on strategy. Um, you know, so really building up the team, making sure that they're self sufficient, making sure that everybody has swim lanes, right? You don't want a lot of collisions, right? I think the team is really number one, and I believe in service leadership, where it's the inverted pyramid, and then the leader sits at the bottom, and basically just enables everybody, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I'm very fortunate to have a really good team. Yeah, yeah.
And you know, how is this experience so far? Because you're fairly new in the tenure of taking on this role as a CDO. How do you feel like it's impacted your career, but also your thought process, right? I'm sure that there's a lot of learnings that you've already had to step into. Has it changed the way that you think about anything within the data sphere and driving change?
Um, What's interesting is that, even though I look young, I'm really old. I'm not going to tell you the age, but there's patterns, right? Everywhere you go, there's patterns. So there's patterns when it comes to the organization of data. There's patterns when it comes to technology. There's patterns when it comes to building product and also go to market. So I would say it's very experiential, right?
Yeah.
Stepping into the role, I'm like, oh, like this is what we did at Reltio. This is what we did at D&B. This is what we did at IBM, right? So I guess really just, when you have those experiences, connect them to what you're doing right now. And that shouldn't mean that you dictate your experiences should not dictate what you should do, but it should give you some type of perspective, right? Um, yeah, that's what I would say. Yeah.
And so far, can you share any success stories that you've had in this role? I know that we talked about it a little bit earlier, but like notable achievements that resulted in this current business, right? Because I do think that, you know, there probably is some differences, right, that you're experiencing with the type of reporting, and maybe not. Maybe you've had these experiences all, and this is kind of, a smooth trajectory. From a lot of the people that I've talked to in the past, when they step into that role, there is kind of this um, giving up of what they thought the power and control they had on things. And it sounds like you've already, touched upon that a little bit by managing from the bottom up. Um, can you describe that to our listeners a little bit, especially those that haven't had those experiences? What is it like leading from the bottom up, right? How do you keep people in those swim lanes? And what do you do when there is a point of contention or you need to realign things? How do you manage those situations?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's constantly evolving. I think number one is trust, right? Trust of the people that are on your team, right? And then that trust will kind of bubble down. And then it's hard, right? Because you got to blend trust with accountability, right? You don't want to trust them too much to where they don't deliver, right? So I think that could be done with proper goal setting and things like OKRs and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I think there are two things, right? Providing the psychological safety is very important when building a team. If they feel if people don't feel safe at work, they're not going to perform. And then making sure it's fun as well, right? So one of my former bosses at D&B was a guy named Michael Bird. Still keep in touch with him, but he was the CEO of Net Prospects. When we acquired them, he became my boss. He was like, yeah, it's all about what you're doing and who you're doing it with, right? Yeah. So for me, that's kind of a core principle, and then hopefully the team will see that as well. If the work is meaningful and fun, and then if the people around them are great to work with, then I think that they'll build a really good culture. And then another important thing for me is diversity, right? So you have the normal vectors of diversity. You have, gender and race and things like that. So definitely very important to have a diverse team, but also diversity in terms of experience, right? So, I might have somebody who's brand new to data science, or somebody that's brand new to integration, or somebody that's came from a liberal arts background that wants to be technical, right? Or I have, people that are very tenured. I think having that mix is kind of where innovation happens.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
And, leading data teams, the most successful data teams I've ever had are when you have a strong diversity of culture, personalities, backgrounds, education. Everybody brings a different view to a complex problem, and inherently that helps you resolve as many of those blind spots as possible ahead of time, which you wouldn't have otherwise seen. Chris Pardo, thank you so much for your time. This was an incredibly helpful and insightful podcast. Really appreciate you joining us, especially when you're this busy. We'll try to work on finding you more hours in the day. My recommendation is coffee and Red Bull, but not everybody can digest that much caffeine. So thank you again, though. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is really good, Chris, and appreciate you coming on. And thank you everyone for coming on or listening to another Data Hurdles. Please rate and review us. My name is Chris Detzel, and
I'm Michael Burke. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks, Pardo.
Thank you, everyone.